Hey, welcome back to Strange Wilderness, and I'm again in my indoor studio because it's another lousy rainy day out. So anyway, I've mentioned before my first encounter I had was up at Copscook State Park up in Maine. It's about 3/4 of the way up the coast of Maine. If you want to catch that and some of my other sightings I've had, go back to my Scary Monster episode and you can check out what happened and what I saw. But anyway, one thing that I didn't mention before happening up at Copscook State Park was that first day I had my sighting. It kind of like rattled me. I was very leery about going in the woods. So the following day, me and my sons decided to stay out of the woods. I didn't tell them what was going on. But we ended up going across the street. There's a area where there's a bunch of cabins that the rangers stayed in, and behind the cabins is a pond. So we decided to go fishing there for the day. And when we got there, it was pretty muddy, and I noticed all these animal footprints. There were raccoons, there were deer, just possums, raccoons. You could tell we're in the mud, but there were some large footprints there too. And at first, I thought they were bear footprints. They might have been, but after doing some of the research, I've seen that they didn't appear to be bear. They appeared to be large human-like footprints. And I noticed behind us was an open field. So I decided to take my boys into the open field and see if we could find some deer. And as we get about 3/4 of the way down this muddy trail, there were all kinds of blueberry bushes all over the place, and we decided to stop and start picking some blueberries. And all of a sudden I looked down and I saw these enormous mounds of poop. And I got closer and I was inspecting the poop, and I noticed that they were like infatuated with blueberries. And the strange thing was they had like bones, tiny bones, and hair in them, and they didn't appear to be like cow poops like bears normally do. These were very huge human-like poops that were probably 3 to 4 times larger than what the normal human would do. And one of them I was looking at definitely had like reddish hair in it, like it had eaten a red squirrel. And all of a sudden it took me back to the day before when I saw that creature, that Bigfoot, walking off with a small red squirrel in his hand. And anyway, I've encountered poops in the woods. I've encountered footprints. I've been growled at. I've been yelled at. I've been huffed at. I've heard strange howls. I've heard the Bigfoots mimicking loons. I've heard them doing coyote calls, howls. I've been roared at. And again, if you want to hear about some of the sightings where my more terrifying encounters occurred, you can go back to my Scary Monster episode, and there's quite a few in there. But I bring up Copscook State Park again because over the years I kept going back there. Probably for like 20 years after my first sighting there, I kept going there and having strange things happen. Again, hearing different things that just didn't seem like a normal, animal out in the wild. But one particular time I went up to Copscook, I got there early. It was early in the day. My 2 sons were supposed to meet me there. They were still in school, so they were going to get a ride over. And anyway, I got there early, probably 11 o'clock in the morning, so I decided to go out and do some clamming. You could actually clam there for free, and so I went out and I got like 2 bushels of clams, and I brought them back, and I had them in buckets, and I actually took them down to the edge of the water because the campsite I was on was right at the edge of Copscook Bay, which is where Copscook State Park gets its name. And I had them in a nice tidal pool, and I was waiting for my sons to show up, and I expected them to be there about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So anyway, my sons never showed up. It got to be about 6, 7 o'clock at night, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to eat the clams. I don't know what happened to my sons, and I'll find out the next morning. I'll call and find out what happened to them. And anyway, I left these 2 bushels of clams in this rock formation that I made down by the water, and the water was in, and it would keep them fresh. So I ended up going to bed that night, and in the middle of the night, I'd say it was probably 1, 2 o'clock at night, I woke up and I heard this very loud owl above my tent hooting and, doing the normal owl hoots. And it was probably like 5 feet above the top of my tent. So I sat there and I'm listening to the thing. It kept going and going, and I'm like, that's just odd because it doesn't sound like an owl. It was just off, and it was very loud. And it had this like very deep sensation to it. So I'm sitting there listening to it for about 5 minutes. It's going off, and all of a sudden I just decided I've had enough of this, and I'm going to get out of the tent and shoo this owl away. And I started to unzip my zipper on my sleeping bag, and I hear this owl hoot get louder, and all of a sudden this other hoot starts happening down by the water, and these 2 start going back and forth, and I'm like, this is odd. Why is an owl down by the water? I mean, it actually sounded like it was hovering over the water. So again, I was getting irritated, and I said, well, I'm going to get out of the tent and shoo these things away. And all of a sudden I hear these loud footsteps walking next to the edge of my tent, and the hooting was going with these footsteps, and it started walking away from my tent, but I could hear these deep, heavy footsteps going off, and it started walking towards the bank that led down to the edge of Copscook Bay. And in the meantime, this other hoot keeps going down at the water, and the 2 are hooting. So I sat there kind of scared and petrified, and I'm listening to these deep hoots and howls, and all of a sudden I hear these large footprints going back and forth on the rocks, and I hear like scurrying noises, and I hear these scavenging noises and rocks being moved around, and I'm thinking, boy, this is very odd. So I stayed up for a little bit, and pretty soon it got quiet. The hooting stopped. The 2 weren't communicating with each other, and I ended up waking up the next morning. I actually fell asleep, and I went down to the area down by the water, and checked it out. And first thing I noticed were these huge scuff marks going down the bank in to reach down near the rocky shore, and I walked over to where my clams were supposed to be, and the clams had all been ripped open. They had been eaten. Clam shells were scattered all over the place. I couldn't find any footprints because it's a very rocky coastline, and there's rocks all over the place. But I thought that was very odd. So actually, to make a long story short, so I was trying to figure out what had happened to my sons, and there was a payphone up at the check-in station. I went up there to check in, and to get on the phone and make my phone call to find out what happened to my boys. And as I got there, there's a large poster up there saying, "Red tide in, don't eat the clams." So in a way, Sasquatch kind of saved my life, and I kind of wondered what happened to those Sasquatches. Whether they got sick the following day or something worse. But that was one of the many different hoots and howls and different things I've heard. I've been up at Camden State Park, which is about halfway up the Maine coast, and off in the distance one night I woke up and these very loud, mournful howls were going off, kind of like the Sierra sounds. And I actually was getting out of my tent to go to my car because I had my camcorder in there. I wanted to record these, weird sounds. And I heard something heavy walking around my tent, my tent area. So I decided against it, and I just ended up staying in there in the night. But I've heard many different weird things, and like I said, I've heard them mimicking loons. But you can just tell these aren't creatures that they're, trying to mimic, because they're much louder, they're much deeper, and just too loud for something, that you would normally expect. So anyway, that was one of my other encounters up at Copska State Park. And what I'm going to leave you now with is some of the other evidence I've found of Bigfoot's tree structures, bent over trees. I witnessed the tree breaks, and you can go back to the Maniacs of Maine and see that. But you'll see in this segment some of the broken trees that were knocked down while I was sunning on a sun porch. There were 2 actually knocked down. And the interesting thing is when you get to the rock formation part, there are some rock formations down to the left of the video. There are 3 distinct large boulder structures that have been heaped up on each other, and these boulders were at least 6 to 8 feet, each one of them. And they were in a triangular shape, these 3 different structures, And the interesting thing was I was on one mountain and I was actually videoing across Long Pond over to Beach Mountain. And that's where these, formations were. And I think it was the following summer I hiked up Beach Mountain and I was going up a trail. And one thing that the rangers, I guess, do is sometimes they clear large rocks and stuff out of the trail, and they make kind of like borders going along the edge of the trails as you're going up. Well, I was going up one of these trails, and there was this big crater of about a basketball-sized boulder that had been taken out. And it wasn't there. I didn't see it. It was obviously too big for rain to wash it away or anything. And as I'm looking at the crater, all of a sudden this big black Labrador comes down with its owner. It's coming down the trail. And so Loki and I stepped off the trail. I wanted to let the dog go by because Loki gets overly excited when dogs come. And we walked, 10, 15 feet off the trail, said hello to the 2 and let them go by. And as I'm getting ready to step back on the trail, I look down and there's this huge basketball-sized boulder sitting at my feet, and it's completely bloody. And I thought, boy, that's pretty odd. So anyway, you can check out some of the other evidence that I have here, and please like, subscribe, and hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. So, as you can see behind me, I found this very odd, strange structure that looks like it's been put together by something. I don't think it's man-made, but if you take a look, this is something that Sasquatches usually do, whether they're making a home or making markers. I'm not really sure, but take a look. This is really interesting, and I just found this. I'm in Acadia National State Park. And again, it's a very odd structure. Loki. I don't know what it is. Now you can see this tree was just recently snapped and broken. This is a fresh snap. and not 20 yards from it, this was just recently broken. And pulled down from where it was broken from the fallen tree. And you can see how close it is to the house. And not even leading away from this broken tree. I'm not sure if you can make it out, but there's some deep scuff marks leading away from it over to the neighbor's house. It's pretty strange. And I just found this too. A bent over tree limb. And here's another shot of the broken tree. And you can see that's a fresh break. And it was broken down. And in here is the swamp area. There's a huge swamp area back here.